Hi everyone, my name is Abby, this is Sarah, Rohit, and Johnny, and we're representing the bioengineering department. Today we're going to talk to you about our senior design project, Proscopy. The goal of our project was to tackle the incidence of rectal injury, which is a complication that can occur during the surgical removal of the prostate using robotic systems. As the diagram above shows, the prostate lies very close to the rectum, which can make this procedure especially tricky. Just a warning that the next slide has graphic images of surgery, and this image will appear later in the presentation as well. So rectal injury occurs most often during the decoration of the plane between the prostate and the rectum. And in an ideal world, this would be an obvious dissection. On the left, you can see an animation of the surgery taking place. The red spherical ball is the prostate being removed, and the rectum lies directly behind it. However, after consulting with surgeons from the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania who perform these types of surgeries, we learned that this can be more tricky in practice. On the right, you can see a real robotic prostatectomy taking place. You can see that it's quite unclear which anatomy is which, and currently it's up to the surgeon's discretion to determine when they have hit that rectal wall. And this can lead to a devastating injury known as rectal injury. If it's small and caught right away, the surgeon can perform a suture in operation. However, for larger rectal injuries or for rectal injuries that go unnoticed, this can lead to severe complications such as sepsis, a diverting colostomy as seen on the right, and even death. And it's important to note that current treatment options are all reactive and do nothing to prevent the incidence of this occurrence. The robotic surgical market is undoubtedly on the rise. According to an Intuitive Surgical Annual Report, there have been over 1.75 million robotic surgeries over a 14-year period. And according to Allied Market Research Industry Analysis, the robotic surgical market was valued at $56 billion in 2017 and is projected to skyrocket to $98 billion by 2025. This translates to an 8.5% compound annual growth rate. So as these numbers suggest, this is a rapidly growing field, and there's a need for iterations on the current technology to make them safer for patients. And Sarah's going to discuss with you how robotic surgery actually works.
Thanks, Abby. So it's important to understand how robotic surgery actually works in order to fully grasp our project. Think of it like a video game. When you play a video game, you use a console, and your actions on that console correspond to movements on a screen. Robotic surgery is almost exactly the same. As you can see in this diagram here, the surgeon actually sits in the corner of the operating room and uses that console to control the robotic arms. This means they never interact directly with the patient during surgery. This brings about one of the major limitations for robotic surgical systems, which is the lack of haptic feedback. Haptic feedback is defined as the use of touch to communicate with the user, the lack of which can lead to unintentional tissue wall penetration because the surgeon cannot actually feel what they're doing within the body. They rely solely on visual feedback when making important surgical decisions. Additionally, one of the reasons rectal injury is a problem is that due to the fact that surgeon expertise is highly variable. 70% of robotic prostatectomies are performed by surgeons who handle less than 100 cases a year. And according to a retrospective analysis, it actually takes 1,600 surgeries to get an acceptable level of competence in these procedures. Additionally, the percentage of prostatectomies that are performed robotically increased from 36.1% in 2008 to 86% in 2015. Based on these numbers, the literature suggests there's up to an 8% incidence rate of rectal injury during robotic prostatectomies. In summary, there are three main factors that lead to the problem of rectal injury: complicated anatomy, as Abby mentioned, lack of haptic feedback, and variable surgeon expertise. Our solution to the problem that we have defined here is twofold and preventative. The first part, on the left, is a magnet-embedded insert that is inserted into the rectum preoperatively, and the second part is a sensor-embedded surgical attachment that will ideally be fully integrated with the robotic arm. Rohit will now explain how this technology works.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm just going to generally go over how our system works. So the rectum insert is placed into the rectum in the anterior position so that it faces the prostate as shown. And then our sensor brace, which is located on the robotic arm, will be able to sense that insert on the other side of the rectum wall and then alert the surgeon of how close they are to the rectal wall. And so the way this sensor brace is actually detecting that insert is through the use of magnets and Hall effect sensors. So Hall effect sensors detect the magnitude of the magnetic field produced by these magnets. And so as you can see in the animation, as the magnet gets closer to the Hall effect sensor, the sensor reads a larger magnetic field and thus produces a larger reading. And we can use this data to get proximity data between the two objects. And so now I'll run you guys through our graphical user interface. This is what the surgeon would be going through. So here's just the start screen. And then they're given a set of instructions on how to use both components of our system, along with an illustration to accompany those instructions. The doctor is then asked to calibrate the system using patient data. So they're asked to upload an MRI image and then select points on that MRI image to determine the rectal wall thickness for that patient. So this is really important because rectal wall thickness is variable between all patients. Nextly, when they move on to the actual operation, they'll be given live proximity data between our insert and the brace. And so when they're more than 6.5 millimeters away, they simply see a green safe. And when they're under 6.5 millimeters, that changes to red and changes to live proximity data. And I just want to point out here that the video that you're seeing is just a simulation. It doesn't correlate to the data that you're seeing on the bottom of that screen, but on the right, as our device moves closer to the brace, that does correlate to the distances that you're seeing in the video on the left. So this is just to show how our whole system works. And so we set a couple of design goals for each of our components. For the flexible insert, we wanted a minimally invasive diameter. This is so that we could have quick insertion and removal. And also for patient comfort, we also wanted to be sterile and biocompatible because it will be inserted into the body. And lastly, for the insert, we wanted to have conformability such that the insert is at most 1 millimeter away from the rectal wall at all times. And this makes sure that we have accurate data, consistent data between all patients because we don't want that distance changing. For the sensor brace, we want it to be low weight. We don't want to add too much weight to the surgical arm and then affect how that operates. We also want to have high precision. After talking to some urologists, they mentioned that they're able to operate and often need to operate within a couple millimeters of the rectal wall. And so we want to make sure that we can give them that precision and resolution so that they can continue to do that. Lastly, we wanted to see what our optimal range is for our sensors. And so given that the rectal wall and the components of the arm have about a distance of already 10 millimeters, we decided to aim for a range of 5 to 25 millimeters for our system. And so now I'll just be running through the design choices that we made for each of our components. So here we have the magnetic insert. And in the center, you see the living hinge structure. This allows for it to conform to the curvature of the rectum. We also have one hole for a magnet. We decided to go with one magnet because there were a lot of complications with the sensor readings when we had more than one magnet. And additionally, this magnetic insert will be covered by a silicone mold so that it remains sterile and biocompatible between all cases. For our sensor brace, we have 3 Hall effect sensors that are embedded into it. 2 of them are facing outward at 30 degrees, and 1 of them is facing forward. This allows for a large radial detection area so that we can capture the insert at sort of the max angle. And we angled it at these angles because according to our angle data, which we'll present in the next slide, this is the maximum that we could put. And also, because we were able to angle it at these various angles, this allowed us to minimize the diameter of the brace overall. And so we did a couple of tests between the Hall effect sensor and the magnet to sort of get various parameters. Firstly, we measured the magnetic field at various distances from the Hall effect sensor, and that was able to give us the precision, resolution, and range of our sensors. So we found that we have a 0.1 millimeter resolution with an optimal range of 2 to 10 millimeters. And within that range, we have a correlation of 0.98. Additionally, we wanted to see how the angle of the magnet relative to the sensor affects our data. And we saw that when the magnet is less than 60 degrees from the front face of the Hall effect sensor, the values don't change drastically. So we were able to use this data to make the design choices that I mentioned earlier. And now I'll pass it off to Johnny.
Thank you, Rohit. So I'm going to talk a bit more about our clinically justified specifications. So first off, to evaluate our flexible insert, of course, we want it to be minimally invasive. So our design goal was to have a 5 centimeter diameter, and we achieved this quite well by actually reducing it down to 2.05 centimeters. Next, we of course want sterility and biocompatibility, and we achieved this by using existing precedents for medical grade materials, such as our silicone rubber cover for the insert. And then finally, for conformability, as Rohit mentioned, it's very important that our flexible insert conforms quite closely to the rectal wall to maximize the precision of our measurements. And we got no more than a 0.9 millimeter deviation from the rectal wall, which is great. Next, for our sensor brace, as Rohit mentioned, it's important to have a low weight, such as not to add too much more mass to the existing robotic arm and affect the maneuverability of the arm throughout the body or snag on tissue. So we achieved this by having a weight of 1.34 grams. We also want high precision. Our goal was 1 millimeter precision, But after performing our data analysis, we realized that we can actually detect up to 0.1 millimeters in difference between measurements. And then finally, for sensor distance range, according to our data, we found that a 2 to 20 millimeter distance range can be realized by our device. And this exceeds our target goal of 5 to 25 millimeters. Next, to talk about our cost of production and pricing, we anticipate that most of our parts of our design can be injection molded, and this allows for flexibility of design, as well as having a low material cost at scale. And we did high and low estimates for each of these parts, and came to a cost of about $40.53. And after accounting for margins for retail, manufacturing, and distribution, we came at a target selling price of about $132. So this brings us to our future improvements. First off, obviously anything we're inserting invasively into the body needs to be biocompatible, and we've taken some steps to mitigate how dangerous it might be to the body by using medical grade materials. However, for parts of our design, such as the silicone cover for the flexible insert, this introduces a little bit of waste, so it requires additional vigilance from medical staff to make sure these supplies are well stocked in order to perform our procedure successfully. For clinical efficacy, we've obviously shown that our device is precise and works well in the lab according to our evaluation methods. However, we won't quite know how it works in the body until it's tested in vitro in animal models and ultimately in clinical trials in humans as well. And finally, for evaluating how this is going to be best integrated into the current surgical robotic units, we initially wanted our device to be a modular design such that it can be implemented in existing units as well as new ones, such that we can provide safety for as many patients as we can. However, we realized that according to the cost model and market dynamics, considering that there's only 800 of these units produced every year, our total market opportunity isn't that valuable. So another attractive market entry strategy might be to license our technology to existing medical device companies of scale, such as Intuitive Surgical, as they have the economies of scale to decrease manufacturing costs, as well as already established channels for achieving clinical and regulatory approval. And we believe that this strategy will help accelerate the speed at which we can improve patient outcomes, which is our ultimate goal. So finally, we'd like to extend a special thanks to our advisors at Penn Medicine, as well as our friends and mentors in the BE department, as shown here. And with that, we are Proscopy, and we're providing a new view into rectal injury prevention. Thank you. We'll take any questions.
Sorry if I missed it, but at the start you talked about haptics. It looked like it was just more of a visual rendering. Did I miss something? Is there a haptic?
Yeah, so we're not actually filling the need of providing haptics in the system. That's just sort of one of the causes of the problem we're trying to address. So instead of creating haptic feedback within the system, we're adding an additional type of feedback that the surgeon can use to be better informed when making decisions during these procedures.
To add to that, one of our advisors, Dr. Soriano, we actually asked him about that. How close is this field to actually achieving real haptic feedback? And they said Intuitive Surgical have been working on this for years, and they still have not really achieved something that works quite well. So we believe in the meantime, in the interim, we can provide some sort of safety mechanism to prevent this 9% incidence rate of this devastating injury before haptics, can evolve to be effective. Question?
So that's fascinating. But one of the ways that you create the injuries of the rectum is not by a metallic instrument. It's by arching of the cautery, where you don't notice that you're burning something that's bleeding over here, but there's an arch that reaches across and makes a hole, and the hole is not discovered until later. Right. Would this be able to be applied to that?
It could be added to any of the surgical tools, and I guess we would consult with more surgeons to determine which tool they feel is more likely to
Our data could be valuable in this case by if we, from a parallel study that shows perhaps at what distance to the rectum this cauterization occurs. If it's more likely at a certain distance to the rectum, at least we can provide the real-time proximity data to kind of give a sense of how probable this injury might be at that distance. So that's a great potential addition to our design.
I mean, nothing to do with this, but colonoscopies have the same risk of puncturing colons. Obviously, it's harder to get something into the body. Right. Is there any kind of technology or application you could see for something like that?
Yeah, of course. You want to answer?
Yeah, so we originally had designed this to be a stent, a magnetic stent. So we imagine if we replace this exact insert with a magnetic stent, we could also solve that issue there. There was obviously a lot of issues with budgeting and that for this project.
Yes, sir.
A comment and a question. Great idea. I think you got a bigger market than you think because this could go to different surgical procedures.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then you have international versus domestic.
Yeah, precisely.
So the biggest thing I think you got is how you get this small.
Yeah, I agree.
And what's your thought about
Well, yeah, we definitely agree with that. That's why we think it would be better integrated into the existing arms, such as not to add too much, additional radius to the tool. So if we don't have access to the proprietary technology of the DaVinci, so we couldn't quite get the parameters or, figure out actually how to integrate it into their existing platform. That would have shown better proof of concept, but with our device, we're basically demonstrating that there is a current solution to this problem that these companies can introduce, and as you said, at a large scale.
I think you could work with the sensor.
Yeah. I think definitely one of the most exciting things about this project is the fact this underlying technology, and we applied it to one specific problem in one specific surgery, but I think moving forward and talking to more surgeons and learning more about the issues that happen, we could apply it in different ways.
Yeah, just to talk quickly on, we talked to doctors and said that this can be applied to many different surgeries. We actually started off as a safety mechanism for preventing cosmetic punctures in breast surgeries, so we pivoted quite a bit, but yes, there is definitely potential for this technology in other surgeries.
That's all the time we have.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.